Lena X says, we just did WW. Lena X says, WF is next. Oreo Sneaky says, SHHHH they don't know that. Zine says, 2.70 US $/days still too much farmer Indo RMT this game. Lena X says, lol. Sasha McLeod says, I attached your hyssop to the arrow I killed you with lol. Tushnbi Woodya says, is that after 3 others came to help? Prague says, conscripts flail, wild random PvP track flails. Stuna says, help I lost my keyboard. Duke Abigor says, bring out your dead. Lena X says, WF invasion pulls in 7 and we could use 8 more. 3k payouts upon win. 3. Lena X says, WF invasion pulls in 7 and we could use 8 more. 3k payouts upon win. 3. Sasha McLeod says, no ruffle. Lucien Poitras says, do you guys know if our progress/characters will wipe when they reset to New World? Or is this server like Noah's Ark before the storm lol? Strapu says, at Zint are you Indo farmer? Tushnbi Woodya says, this is the last hurrah. The Covenant faction has thrown Restless Shore into a conflict state. They can now declare war. Not Yonik says, it's the final countdown. Mundi says, I vote we all sit around a bonfire and tell our fav stories. Scorpbot says, TTV/newbie but is sore, ready for healing. DST no heals for Grassy. Badass says, debut. Tushnbi Woodya says, this one time at band camp Yonik touched my feet and then gave my a diamond ring. A company in Covenant has declared war on Restless Shore. The final warring company will be determined in 10 meters. Duke Abigor says, Briar, always showing up when the work's done. Calico Reynolds says, defend the swamp. Sasha McLeod says, it was my ring. Kyofu says, frozen replica Orichalcum brutish rapier, WTS. MRC1 says, what next? Kuya Eddie says, Eridanus scropius. Harmony Boar says, CK. Duke Abigor says, Irad. MRC1 says, okay. Duke Abigor says, already loaded for A. Waynabe DPS says, Xion. Lena X says, WF invasion pulls in 3. Could use 5 more. 3k payouts upon win. 3. Lena X says, WF invasion pulls in 3. Could use 5 more. 3k payouts upon win. 3. Rooster says, Ufda I don't know anyone on anymore. AFCAP says, brown ring. Waynabe DPS says, Xion. AU says, XNH race. On Ice says, TTV onus 8 Joe Pov plumber Pov larp Pov point Pov tank Pov seahorse Pov butt Pov shield Pov flail Pov twerk Pov. Oreo Sneaky says, payouts based on how much you interfere with comms. Mystic Bliss says, where invasion sign up. Sasha McLeod says, luau. AFCAP says, but if you can't be with the one you love, honey. Take a Boy says, but Pov. AFCAP says, love the one you're with. Scorpbot says, TTV/newbie new my butt is sore asf G8 healer POV Jajal Emmy freecast. Slavig says, open map, click on territory capital, choose invasion. AFCAP says, starfish and coffee.
Until you betrayed me on the beach. Now I have one final order. Walk away. Disobey me, and you will be destroyed.
Sasha McLeod says, ex-mommy daddy car.
You charged into the fort and against a small army, and now you return unscathed. That alone is quite a feat. But what of your former captain? This Commander Thorpe, was he there? Did you confront him? Do we know to what end all this work is being done? But these were few and far between. If Commander Thorpe summoned an army, if Commander Thorpe is but we must shut. One of us should attempt to track where we've scouted the.
Ziaku says, hello, we are recruiting for war. Join, we're trying our best. New and benched players needed. All roles. No VODs or gear rec. Play what you want. DM for info, war tomorrow. Ziaku says, hello, we are recruiting for war. Join, we're trying our best. New and benched players needed. All roles. No VODs or gear rec. Play what you want. DM for info, war tomorrow. Lena X says, still room for 15 more in WF Invasion. 3k payouts upon win. Lena X says, still room for 15 more in WF Invasion. 3k payouts upon win. Sasha McLeod says, X no room for you prom. Molden says, RIPWF. Duke Abigor says, lol. MRC1 says, damn, lol. Duke Abigor says, that was 20k in one hit somehow. Margapolo says, Mercs up. Zesman says, X up for Merc. Albie Bach says, X Merc. Johnny Utah says, X Merc. Lena X says, still room for 12 in WF Invasion. We could use healers. 3k payouts upon win. Crazy Sixth says, X Mick. Lena X says, still room for 12 in WF Invasion. We could use healers. 3k payouts upon win. Duke Abigor says, thanks MRC. Julie says, X Merc. Ikigo says, X Merc. Phantom says, X Merc. MRC1 says, tie. Lena X says, now we can use DPS please. Lena X says, now we can use DPS please. Ikigo says, X Merc. Harmony Boar says, tie MRC1. AFCAP says, I dunno, sounds risky. Chucky Garza says, anyone to Popel want to join me real quick in getting the Acvament for Dynasty Shipyard? MRC1 says, tie GG. Lena X says, are you afraid of the cannons at AFCAP? PPI Republic of China has declared war on COS2 for control of Restless Shore. Chucky Garza says, or 2 people can join and just leave if you are down. Dr. Rocco says, X. Nick Holman says, X Merc. Scorpbot says, TTV/newbie G8 healer POVJ Jajaja my butt is sore, from War at Owens. Barkraper says, XMTick. AFCAP says, I'm afraid of the Star Wars canon, does that count? Barkraper says, Ormeric. Lena X says, I'll accept it. Bootya says, X Merc. AFCAP says, D. Lena X says, hyphen. Lena X says, still room for 9 in WF Invasion. 3 mins to get your booty in here. Lena X says, still room for 9 in WF Invasion. 3 mins to get your booty in here. Ip says, buying purple zerb $10. Tushnbi Woodya says, 100k and mimures. Zesman says, October 20th for Merc. Any others before we get to killing some corrupted? Fi Leaf says, Hosser healer. Crazy Sixth says, X. Slyo says, X Diepk. Ip says, where are trash cans when it's even S? Fi Leaf says, yo Leo. Hoesxmad says, X Merc. Fi Leaf says, you heavy big boy. Afcap says, sidebar, how's your daddy? Molden says, 200k and I lines bring the pain. Fi Leaf says, Tempest JR looking ass. Chungus 101 says, big Chungus boy. Zesman says, we going. Shintaro says, Tempest Jr. looking ass is wild Mao. NWL Peb says, Tempest Jr. looking ass.
The brilliance of our plans. There is time yet for you to join the side of righteousness.
On Ice says, at Fi Leaf come gimme a bleep kiss. Ip says, I'm gonna make a wish that the purple Zerg shows up. Half-Cap says, no I am a sexy MFR. Fi Leaf says, half the weight of Tempest but that's still 400. It's Tempest says, TTV/U Tempest. Loom downgraded in Ebon Scale Reach. Forge downgraded in Ebon Scale Reach. Workshop downgraded in Ebon Scale Reach. Outfitting Station downgraded in Ebon Scale Reach. Freeman X24 says, X Merc. Molden says, you know what they say about wishes, wish in one hand and bleed the other, see what you have more of at the end of the day. Ip says, crickets. Molden says, lol. Afcap says, wish in one hand bleep the other, let's shake on it, D. Molden says, sure. Gates downgraded in Monarch's Bluffs. Emplacement points downgraded in Monarch's Bluffs. Warhorns downgraded in Monarch's Bluffs. Xiaoku says GGMB. Xiaoku says China 1. Loina says China number 1. Xiaoku says China 1. AFCAP says China Beach. Penix says rice. AFCAP says Helgenberger. Barnacle says hamburger. AFCAP says I didn't stutter I cook. Barnacle says it kick.
How deep their color. Like blood that has been... See how they catch the...
I heard the fire of cats. Since you are standing before me, I'm guessing that their cuts are... Oh, it seems Galahad's project... No.
I know, Jonas is... We have a lead the...
Haskell Nee Boss says, Shard of Pride, X318K/each. Berserk says, X Cave. Berserk says, February 20th for Cave. Zesman says, Tidiol for the Merc run. XQBackStevX says, GG.
Aha! I was hoping to run into you. Well, Commander Jonas, really, but you'll do. On Galahad's orders, the corrupt...
Berserk says, XK February 20th.
I'll wait until you make...
You look like you could use a good meal. I could plainly tell you. But I wouldn't.
Cabarrus says, WTS, exemplary ring, exemplary amulet, exemplary amulet. Berserk says, X Cave February 20th. Berserk says, X Cave February 20th.
Priests tell me they have seen visions of the realm of corruption. And though a hellscape it may be, I've come to see the truth of the Tempest.
Sir Tank says, X-Violent.
She says this is the birthright humanity was denied at the dawn of time. That the ancients here expelled us from this Eden and planted the false mythologies in our minds to keep us in the dark. The so-called corruption is not some fiendish terror, but rather the gift of Godhead that we will now share across this island and across the earth.
Berserk says, X Cave March 20th. Sir Tank says, X Violent Fury. Masking says, Abyssal Replica Orichalcum Brutish Great Axe, WTS.
The time of confluence draws near. The portals are almost done. They have been placed all around the heights, and shall turn the land red with their glow. It will be glorious. A triumph of engineering and skill.
25 says, X Sir Tank.
We shall bring forth reinforcements that this land has never seen.
Sir Tank says, LF1 DPS with a big PP for Gorg DM.
Across the land.
Berserk says, X Cave March 20th.
Never again.
25 says, X Sir Tank.
We are united.
25 says, X Sir Tank. Skak 1 says, XCK. Akuan says, X Vade Gorgs. "25 says, X Sir Tank. Gates downgraded in Brightwood. Emplacement points downgraded in Brightwood. Ballista downgraded in Brightwood. Burning oil vat downgraded in Brightwood. Warhorns downgraded in Brightwood. Skak 1 says, XCK. 25 says, X Certmac. Harmony Boar says, XCK. 25 says, X Sir. Sweaty Coffin says, War Camp you losers you owe me fake 20k. Asker Wild says, X Gorgivade. Azorica says, how to save New World Eternum from shutdown. Sasha McLeod says, GGSWF invasion. Skak 1 says, XCK. Teo Brutality says, wowie that bleep was cool GG. Dinosaur Game says, GGBW. Gwicular says, greasy no good bleep spaghetti bleep eating all the macaroni and capicola. Stuna says, dear God not you again. Chaotica says, not the macaroni. Emo Ume says, GGGGG. I hate PvE says, I forgot to hit record bleep my chungus life. Lucian Quatra says, Jesus Christ what in God's name did you just vomit out? Do you Havaflug says, stuck a fev in his head and called it. Fludowski says, fat bleep. Fludowski says, JK. Fludowski says, GG. Tolly22 says, I knew the other PvE was better. I hate PvE says, Lil Tedros. Giant Dwarf says, when the servers shut down in January, are they still going to let you play solo? Skak1 says, no. Stuna says, that's what I'm assuming. Gwicular says, at Giant Dwarf, did you just call me Umgur? Giant Dwarf says, damn, so bleep, no playing at all. Giant Dwarf says, yeah. Lucien Poitras says, thanks for your money, bye. Berserk says, X Cave March 20th. Creamy Coleslaw says, oh. Lucien Poitras says, but hey, now at least I have free horsey skins and unlimited drip, so there's that.
You did it! I almost...
This outpost is beyond. If you're we left some wardens to maintain the... It's clear.
Lucien Poitras says, you will address me as a lord named Slickback. You have to say the whole thing like a tribe called Red. Berserk says, X Cave March 20th. Berserk says, X Cave February 20th. Sharp says, X Cave. Azorica says, best place to hang Amazon executives by entrails as example. Mrs. Elena says, X Glob. Berserk says, X Cave March 20th. Berserk says, X Cave March 20th. Margapolo says, Random Moot. Nikolash says, X Glob. Nikolash says, X glob. Mrs. Elena says, XDPS moot. Badass says, GGBW. Harmony Boar says, XDPS moot. Christian Q says, X mood any roll. Dr. Rocco says, thanks for the fun opers tonight for those who still play. Hyphen. Amethyst Carpel says, X glob. Dr. Rocco says, GG I'm out. Cybertooth says, GG mate. Shrimps is Bugs says, _ Nikolash says, X glob. Do you have a flag says, who let all the og out? Lashaw says, X Helio. Berserk says, X Cave March 20th. Lashaw says, X Helio. Tahi says, exemplary amulet, 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 frozen replica Orichalcum brutish great axe, frozen replica Orichalcum brutish great axe, ignited replica Orichalcum brutish great axe, WTS. Making more CDs says, X. Ikigo says, X Cave. Amethyst Carpel says, X Glob PLZ. Bot XD says, X Leo or time. Berserk says, X Cave March 20th. Camparius Lagiar says, don't go anywhere near center of room for Kepri, that is how you wake him. Sam Arlini says, tie. Nikolash says, X-Glob. Tomasking says, Abyssal Replica Orichalcum Brutish Great Axe, WTS. Amethyst Carpel says, X-Glob February 20th. Bot XD says, X. Lunatera Lulu says, Electrified Replica Orichalcum Brutish Musket, Arboreal Replica Orichalcum Brutish Void Gauntlet, Frozen Replica Orichalcum Brutish Void Gauntlet, Arboreal Replica Orichalcum Brutish Fire Staff. Sir Tank says, I got both. Forsaken Paths says, do random queues pop for expeditions for money? Ryuyan Ki Yalwa says, okay invite ya. What says, yeah. Olsik says, not a lot. Helps to advertise. Forsaken Paths says, I can do tank or DPS random queue. Forsaken Paths says, im queued as tank RN. What says, Reg? Amethyst Carpel says, Glob Farming February 20th X up. Forsaken Paths says, yeah. Forsaken Paths says, I don't want to run M1S, just restarted after months. The Covenant faction has thrown Ninth Haven into a conflict state. They can now declare war. Olympuk says, Kier. JZSL says, X River. Olympuk says, Kier Kier Kier. Olympuk says, if you have him on Urtaram or Gonal so. Olympuk says, Gial. Sharp says, X up 4 cave, get her bis items. Kingwe 6455 says, is anybody else trying to find a Opermach? Azorica says, send weaponized drone to Amazon CEO Andy Jassy 410 Terry Avenue North Seattle, WA 98109. A company in Covenant has declared war on Ninth Haven. The final warring company will be determined in 10 meters. Benatha says, bomb. Nikolash says, X for Glob March 20th. Windfeng says, 1. Strumchasr says, X up for Glob March 20th. JZSL says, X River. HOESXMAD says, X Cave. Berserk says, X Cave April 20th. Too soon says, plus. JZSL says, X River 320. Grandmaster 4 says, X Cave. Berserk says, X Cave May 20th. Berserk says, need more 4 Cave OMG 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 OMG. Richard Johnson says, Richard Johnson drops dead. Richard Johnson says, Richard Johnson begins to dig a grave. Lashaw says, X scrop up. Grandmaster 4 says, X cave. Richard Johnson says, Richard Johnson uses a tea bag to brew a cup of tea. Richard Johnson says, Richard Johnson celebrates like a champion. Richard Johnson says, Richard Johnson toasts to good health. Toe Masking says, Abyssal Replica Orichalcum Brutish Great Axe, WTS. Richard Johnson says, Richard Johnson flipped a coin and it lands on tails. Richard Johnson says, Richard Johnson performs a flawless crane kick. Richard Johnson says, Richard Johnson bursts into a futuristic dance. Richard Johnson says, Richard Johnson shoots their fingers like guns. Richard Johnson says, Richard Johnson gives the hottest performance of the season. Richard Johnson says, Richard Johnson gives the hottest performance of the season. Sadie Alexis says, 1 Oper, 30 seconds to start. Richard Johnson says, Richard Johnson runs like a ninja. Richard Johnson says, Richard Johnson runs like a ninja. Stuna says, FRE that spells free, free credit bleep baby. Sadie Alexis says, Q Oper. Richard Johnson says, Richard Johnson runs like a ninja. Pludowski says, EWWOPR. Amethyst Carpel says, X Glob April 20th. Richard Johnson says, Richard Johnson does the Oxborough step. Richard Johnson says, Richard Johnson dances with sparklers. (27-12-25) says, plus Gorgon January 10th LF2 heal plus 1 tank plus 6 DPS. Firebolt says, need more PPL for kill Scorp Knight. 27-12-25 says, X Gorgon January 10th LF2 heal plus 1 tank plus 6 DPS. Maccaw Kim S1 says, hi y'all, D. Maccaw Kim S1 says, oh Hive is fun. Maccaw Kim S1 says, X Hive. Maccaw Kim S1 says, LF fun. Little Norse says, X Glob. Captain Punch says, X Gorgivade. Matt Cockham S1 says, let's do fun, D. Matt Cockham S1 says, anyone up for fun hive run? Hoyadawa has declared war on Oppo-Bon for control of Ninth Haven. Z Sub-Zero says, X Gorgivade / blood. 27-12-25 says, X Gorgon March 10th. Z Sub-Zero says, X Gorgivade / blood. Nikolash says, X up for Glob April 20th. 27-12-25 says, X Gorgon March 10th. Zandival says, X Hive. Pascal Boss says, X Glob. Grandmaster 4 says, X Cave. Berserk says, X Cave June 20th. X Cubax Stevex says, is there a group in Merc? (27-12-25) says, X Gorgon May 10th LF2 heal +1 tank +2 DPS. (27-12-25) says, X Gorgon May 10th LF2 heal +1 tank +2 DPS. Enchantress 3 says, LF1M Frashian-evade. Briar says, do old weapon mods for skills still drop? Jihio says, honing acid, X12 WTS. Aphrodite 85 says, X500 con DPS. Akuan says, I think on Eperno. Aphrodite 85 says, X500 con DPS Gorg. Bramkar says, think so Iraq, you need an old craft mod? Briar says, no. Briar says, just haven't gotten one in a long time. Sasha McLeod says, who bought algae from the Well of Fortune and put it in the reflecting pool? Jihio says, corrupted lodestone, WTB. Ongali says, electrified replica Orichalcum Brutish Great Axe, banner fragment. Berserk says, X Cave May 20th. Maggie Bloomsday says, Vance. Skfak1 says, that's not algae, it's poo. Sasha McLeod says, lol. A Lonely Night says, XD. Karura says, X Glob. Jihio says, Honing Acid, X12 WTS / Corrupted Lodestone, WTB. Lily Clarebrook says, Sasha MC Droopy Drawers. Matt Cockkim S1 says, X Up Hive, D. Berserk says, X Cave May 20th. Matt Cockkim S1 says, we don't have PPL for Hive. Sasha McLeod says, MC Drippy Drawers. Lily Clarebrook says, lol. Sasha McLeod says, lol. Do You Havaflug says, wet cleanup aisle 3. (27-12-25) says, X Gorgon May 10th LF2 heal +1 tank +2 DPS. A Lonely Night says, I've been waiting for someone to start a hive. Sasha McLeod says, Sponge WTB. Matt Cockkim S1 says, we are starting. Skfak1 says, that's not water, it's runoff. Ta'i says, exemplary amulet, 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 empowered replica Orichalcum Brutish Fire Staff, ignited replica Orichalcum Brutish Great Axe, frozen replica Orichalcum Brutish Great Axe, WTS. Matt Cockkim S1 says, why not join us? Jihio says, Honing Acid, X12 WTS // Corrupted Lodestone, WTB. A Lonely Night says, X Gorgivade. Do You Havaflug says, all that scratchin' is mackin' meach. Berserk says, X Cave May 20th. Berserk says, X Cave May 20th. Zandival says, join us. Matt Cockkim S1 says, X Up Hive June 10th. Lily Clarebrook says, all MC Sasha had a farm, EIEIO don't go in the barn, Amethyst Carpel says, X Glob May 20th. Sasha McLeod says, invasion was fun, I just went for the big boys, you know me XD. Do You Havaflug says, this little piggy went to market, D. Do You Havaflug says, feet are the end game, D. Lily Clearbrook says, and trolling around in corruption, SMH lol. Unhinged Blossom says, X-Cal. Sasha McLeod says, Luau. Amethyst Carpel says, X-Glob June 20th. Sasha McLeod says, Feet pics, for life. Maggie Bloomsday says, most feet are gross. Sasha McLeod says, yes lol. Akuan says, is score up. Killzone 1023 says, X-Scorp. Akuan says, X-Score. Matt Kim S1 says, X up Hive June 10th. Matt Kim S1 says, noon doing Hive. Akuan says, score is up. HOESXMAD says, everybody is gooning in the cave. Masking says, frozen replica Orichalcum brutish great axe, ignited replica Orichalcum brutish great axe, electrified replica Orichalcum brutish great axe, frozen replica Orichalcum brutish great axe, ignited replica Orichalcum brutish great axe, electrified replica Orichalcum brutish great axe, abyssal replica Orichalcum brutish great axe, electrified replica Orichalcum brutish great axe, WTS. Akuan says, night glips like $500 X score. Matt Kim S1 says, Hive is fun and give gears too. A Lonely Night says, Matt Kim S1 says, X up Hive June 10th. Nikolash says, X for Glob June 20th. The Devil's Callan says, X Hive. Berserk says, X Cave May 20th. Berserk says, X Cave June 20th. Killzone 1023 says, X up Night Glyph. Matt Kim S1 says, X up Hive June 10th. Killzone 1023 says, X up Night Glyph Scorp. Matt Cockham S1 says, X up Hive July 10th. Killzone 1023 says, Scorp started. (27-12-25) says, X Gorgon July 10th Gal F2 heal +1 tank. (27-12-25) says, X Gorgon July 10th Gal F2 heal +1 tank. Killzone 1023 says, Scorp dead. Toe Masking says, X Hive evade or bleed. Delana Skirider says, random regular in need of DPS. Zimpo says, X. Lucky Lion says, X. Little Norse says, X Glob. Nikolash says, X for Glob July 20th. Matt Cockham S1 says, X up Hive August 10th. Sasha McLeod says, Ty Scorp. Lucky Lion says, X evade. Ikigo says, X Hive. Miss Talk KXN says, Goldfish in Porcelain Bowl, WTS. Ta'i says, Frozen Replica Orichalcum Brutish Great Axe, Frozen Replica Orichalcum Brutish Great Axe, Ignited Replica Orichalcum Brutish Great Axe, Empowered Replica Orichalcum Brutish Fire Staff, Exemplary Amulet, Exemplary Amulet, Exemplary Amulet, Exemplary Amulet, WTS. Berserk says, X Cave May 20th. Saxon says, X Cave. Stuna says, at Mistalk KXN I got 4.20. Sasha McLeod says, I'll starfish for your goldfish NP. Healer Danny says, anyone doing merc? Portals are up. Miss Talk KXN says, bet. Sasha McLeod says, lol. Sasha McLeod says, Duog says, Xoper. BBDC says, let's go. Buns Boone says, XMVP. Bilbo T. Baggin says, oh now. I just infused my leather pants. Amethyst Carpel says, Glob May 20th. Berserk says, X Cave June 20th. Mac Kim S1 says, Hive LF1M heal. Mac Kim S1 says, Hive LF1M heal or tank. BLVCCSTVRR says, X Gorp heals. Akuan says, X Hives evade. Christian Q says, ooh Hive train. Christian Q says, X Hoover Dam. Sasha McLeod says, X drive hyphen now. Mrs. Elena says, X-Glob. Webier says, Gorg March 10th need few, if we have not ran Togi either before, Ling Tai. JZSL says, X-Glob. Akuan says, X-Evades Gorgs.
Friend, are you outpost?
Christian Q says, lol at Akuan wants to do multiple, p. Amethyst Carpel says, X-Glob June 20th. Boker Bull says, X-Merc. X-Scubax Stevex says, X-Merc. Chaotica says, X-Merc. Webier says, Spicy Hot Pot, WTS Bulk. Parag0N says, X-Merc. Boker Bull says, X-Merc March 20th Ol Portal Spawn.
Welcome.
Persephone says, I hate this part.
You like to get out of the chill.
Lucky Lion says, X-Merc. Webier says, Dante turn on Maelstrom, WTF. Sasha McLeod says, that's what she said. Boker Bull says, X-Merc July 20th Ol Portal Spawn. Margapolo says, X-Glob. Akuan says, X-Mercs or Gorgs. Selja002 says, X-Glob. Ikigo says, X-Merc. Stin says, X-Gorg. Judge Red says, X-Glob. Weslow45 says, X-Gorb. Ikigo says, X-Merc. Berserk says, X Cave June 20th. Cam Bam says, X Ember. Healer Danny says, X Merc. Kooky says, X Merc. Shenaside 1X says, X Gorg evade. Lunatera Lulu says, Electrified replica Orichalcum brutish musket, Arboreal replica Orichalcum brutish fire staff, Arboreal replica Orichalcum brutish void gauntlet, Frozen replica Orichalcum brutish void gauntlet, Frozen replica Orichalcum brutish great axe, Electrified replica Orichalcum brutish great axe, Arboreal replica Orichalcum brutish great axe, Frozen replica Orichalcum brutish great axe, Abyssal replica Orichalcum brutish great axe, Empowered replica Orichalcum brutish great axe, Ignited replica Orichalcum brutish great axe. Weslow 45 says, X Gorb. Margapolo says, no invites for Glob. Webier says, at Weslow 45 make a raid. Luz Theron says, X. Invicticus says, X Gorg evade. Margapolo says, don't you want better results? BLVCCSTVRR says, X Gorg heals or evade. Margapolo says, I roll. HOESXMAD says, don't you want to goon in the cave? June 20th. Berserk says, X Cave June 20th. Sasha McLeod says, nope. Boker Bull says, X Merc October 20th Portal 2. Broseedon says, Fresh Hive Bissy Bois X up June 10th. Blubbush says, X Hive evade. Boker Bull says, X Merc December 20th Portal 3. Stin says, X Gorg. Villainite says, X Merc. 27-12-25 says, X Gorgon August 10th Gal F2 heal. 27-12-25 says, X Gorgon August 10th Gal F2 heal. SGT Boyle says, X Cave PLZ. Benatha says, Freedom to Charm, WTSX3. Berserk says, X Cave July 20th. Sasha McLeod says, Lily made me bedazzle my taint. Benatha says, Freedom to Charm, WTSX3. Brosedan says, To heal. Nah. Mrs. Elena says, X Glob July 20th. Lily Clearbrook says, LOL. Soulburn says, QCTF let's get ER poppin'. Brosedan says, Fresh Hive Bissy Bois X up September 10th. Weslow 45 says, Not bis unless you have 3 healers. Brosedan says, True EE. Sweaty Coffin says, Bayleaf 3. Soulburn says, QCTF. (27-12-25) says, X Grogan August 10th Gal F2 heal. Brosedan says, Fresh Hive Bissy Bois X up September 10th need 1 Bissinator. Not 2 healer Gorg. 27-12-25 says, X Gorgon August 10th Gal F2 heal. Berserk says, X Cave June 20th. Berserk says, X Cave May 20th. Brosedan says, Fresh Hive Bissy Bois X up September 10th need 1 Bissinator not 2 healer Gorg. BBDC says, X Hive. Akuan says, X evades if somehow room opens. (27-12-25) says, X Gorgon September 10th Gal F1 heal. Brosedan says, Full tie. Nikolash says, X for Glob July 20th. Albui says, X Cave. 27-12-25 says, X-Gorgon September 10th Gal F1 heal. Montana Max says, X-Gorg DPS. (27-12-25 says, X-Gorgon September 10th Gal F heal. Soulburn says, QCTF. Boker Bull says, X-Merc December 20th Portal 5. Soulburn says, QCTF. Angelifat says, X-Glob. Azith Crystalmith says, X-Glob. Ikigo says, X-Glob.